Welcome to cyberspace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston. This week, we're talking about what happens to your brain when your work life won't stop shifting under your feet. I read a piece in the APA's Monitor on Psychology from earlier this year called Workers Are Facing an Age of Uncertainty, and it pulled together a bunch of data that individually you've probably already felt in your own life. But somehow seeing it all in one place made the pattern hard to ignore. Their earlier Work in America survey found that 54% of workers say job insecurity is significantly affecting their stress, 65% say their company has been impacted by recent government policy changes, and among workers under 25, that insecurity number jumps to 75%. Only a third of U.S. employees say they're actually engaged at work, and across the board, workers are describing themselves as not just disengaged, but replaceable and invisible. None of that is shocking on its own, but the article framed all of it as a convergence, not as separate problems, but one compounding condition: sustained uncertainty. Economic instability, rapid policy changes, AI restructuring, and profitable companies laying people off are all landing on workers at the same time, and the psychological toll of that combination is different from any one of those stressors in isolation. So let's talk about why uncertainty specifically is so hard on people, what's making it worse right now, and what you can actually do about it. There's a study from 2016 or so where researchers gave participants one simple task. They turned over rocks on a screen, and some of the rocks had snakes under them. If you got a snake, you got a mild electric shock. Over time, participants could learn the probabilities, but the probabilities kept shifting. The finding that stood out to me: people were most stressed when they had about a 50% chance of getting shocked. Not when they knew a shock was coming or knew it wasn't. The maximum moment of stress happened at maximum uncertainty. Their cortisol spiked, their pupils dilated, and they sweated more. Knowing you're going to get hurt is less physiologically stressful than not knowing whether you're going to get hurt. That finding maps directly onto what's happening in workplaces right now. If your company announced tomorrow that your job is gone, that would be terrible and scary, but your brain could then start processing it. You could grieve, you could plan and adapt, but what's happening instead for millions of workers is that they exist in a sustained state of maybe. Maybe there'll be another round of layoffs, or AI will replace their job. Maybe policy changes will restructure your department or take away a grant. And hey, maybe you're fine. Nobody's telling you because in so many cases, nobody actually knows, and your brain treats that ambiguity as an ongoing low-grade emergency. The stress response system evolved for short bursts. See a threat, respond, the threat passes, and your system resets. Sustained uncertainty keeps the system activated without resolution. Your body stays in a state of readiness for a threat that never fully arrives and never goes away. Over time, that degrades your sleep, concentration, decision making, and even your capacity to think creatively. Which, if you think about it, is a brutal irony. Companies need workers who can adapt and innovate during a period of disruption, and the disruption itself is eroding exactly the capacities they need most. The APA article identified several forces converging at once, but the one that does the most psychological damage is certainly layoffs at profitable companies. Not because layoffs are new or because layoffs becoming a trend once companies start doing them are new, but because of what those layoffs at successful companies communicate. When a company that's losing money lays people off, a worker can make sense of it. It's painful, certainly, but the logic tracks. When a company posts record earnings and then cuts thousands of jobs to fund stock buybacks, the message to remaining workers is different. It says your employment isn't connected to whether you do good work or whether the company is successful. It's connected to a quarterly calculation about where capital is most efficiently allocated. You're a line item, and your line can be cut at any time for reasons that have nothing to do with you. That breaks something fundamental about how we relate to our workplace. Decades of research on perceived control show that when people feel they can influence their outcomes through their own actions, they cope with stress dramatically better. The uncertainty of the economy is bad and my company might struggle is manageable because there's still a bit of logic to it. You can work harder or make yourself more valuable or, just do things to try to be the person they keep. The uncertainty of my company is thriving and they cut my department anyway removes logic. There's no action you can take to reduce that risk because that risk was never based on your performance in the first place. And it starts getting interesting psychologically here. Once that connection between effort and security breaks for someone, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. Workers who've lived through a round of profit driven layoffs don't just recover their sense of stability when things calm down. They update their basic understanding of how employment works. They stop believing the premise of work. And that shows up in the data. Among workers at companies with recent layoffs, 65% worry about their job security. At companies without recent layoffs, it's 24%. Workers overall now say they're concerned with being laid off due to anticipated economic shifts, up from 36% the year before. The aftermath has a name in the research: survivor syndrome. Workers who keep their jobs after layoffs consistently report drops in motivation, increased workloads, and declining willingness to recommend their employer. But what's discussed a little less is what survivor syndrome does to workplace culture over time. When everyone around you is operating from a baseline of I could be next, the social fabric of a workplace changes. Collaboration declines because people start protecting their territory. Knowledge sharing drops because hoarding expertise feels like job insurance. Risk taking disappears because nobody wants to be visible for the wrong reasons. The company saves money on headcount, but they pay for it in the slow erosion of everything that made the organization function. 74% of HR leaders say it takes 4 months to over a year for morale to recover after layoffs. But 66% of C suite leaders expect that recovery to happen in under 3 months. That expectation gap tells us something important. The people making these decisions don't understand what the decisions actually cost. And when leadership operates on a fundamentally different understanding of reality than the workforce, that's its own source of uncertainty. The people deciding your future don't grasp the impact of what they've already done, which doesn't inspire confidence about what they'll do next. All of this compounds once trust enters the picture, because trust is what makes uncertainty survivable. Research on coping with unstable environments consistently finds that trust in leadership acts as a buffer. When you trust that your organization will communicate honestly, you can tolerate not knowing what's coming because you believe you'll be told when it matters. The APA survey confirmed this. Workers who felt their organizations were transparent about changes reported less stress and more engagement. But trust has been declining for years and the pace is accelerating. The 2025 Edelman Trust Barometer found that 68% of people now worry that business leaders purposely mislead them. That's up 12 points since 2021. And the reason it's climbing is that workers keep collecting evidence. Return to office mandates pitched as being about collaboration when the data doesn't support that. Layoffs framed as necessary belt tightening at companies sitting on billions in free cash flow. AI adoption sold as a tool to help an employee do their job better, then used to justify eliminating that job. Each one of these instances teaches workers to distrust the next thing leadership says, even if the next thing would happen to be true. That creates a specific and measurable problem. When trust is gone, the psychological experience of uncertainty changes. You're no longer uncertain about what's going to happen. You're uncertain about whether anyone will tell you the truth about what's going to happen. And that's a different cognitive load. The first kind of uncertainty, you can scan for signals and try to prepare, but the second kind undermines the signals themselves, so you can't prepare based on information you don't trust. And you end up trying to prepare for everything, which is functionally the same as preparing for nothing. And it's exhausting in a way that erodes people gradually enough that they often don't recognize it until they're already deep in burnout. And the communication infrastructure is failing too. Gallup's 2026 Global Workplace Report found that manager engagement has dropped 9 points since 2022, with the sharpest decline between 2024 and 2025. Managers are the people who are supposed to translate leadership decisions into something their workforce can understand and act on. When they're disengaged, that pipeline breaks, and uncertainty fills the space where their information used to be. Your manager can't reassure you about things they don't believe themselves. One specific way this shows up is that workers report feeling invisible, not just stressed or overworked, but literally unseen. Research on being chronically ignored at work, or what we call ostracism, shows that it activates the same brain regions as physical pain. It threatens your sense of belonging or self-esteem and your sense of control, and your feeling that your existence matters in the context of work. And it's more damaging than overt bullying, because bullying is at least an acknowledgement that you're there. Being ignored is defined by absence, and absence is nearly impossible to report or to prove. One 2023 study of 65 women of color in white and male-dominated professions found four distinct patterns: erasure, where your contributions go unacknowledged; homogenization, where you're treated as interchangeable with others who share your race; exoticization, where attention is paid only to your otherness; and whitening, where you receive recognition specifically for conforming to white cultural norms. 95% of the women reported experiencing erasure. This doesn't mean invisibility only happens to marginalized workers, but the research makes clear it happens to them more often, more intensely, and with fewer paths to push back. In a climate of sustained uncertainty, everyone's tolerance for being overlooked gets thinner. When you're already worried about whether your job is safe, being left out of a meeting or passed over for a project carries more weight. The stakes of being unseen go up when visibility might be the thing that keeps you employed. So, what do you do with all of this? This is the part of the episode where I'm supposed to give you actionable advice, and I will, but I also think it's important to be upfront about the limits of that advice. So much of the wellness conversation around workplace stress puts the burden on individual workers to manage their response to conditions that are structurally broken. Build resilience, practice mindfulness, set boundaries, and those things can help with the symptoms, but they don't touch the cause. Telling someone to practice deep breathing while their company is gutting entire departments to fund stock buybacks is like handing someone an umbrella in a hurricane. It's technically not wrong, but it's not proportionate to the problem. A few things are actually useful. First, understand that a lot of the suffering that comes from sustained workplace uncertainty is made worse by not understanding why it feels the way it does. When you know that your brain is wired to find uncertainty more stressful than confirmed bad news, that your stress response system wasn't designed to run for months at a time, that the severed connection between effort and security is a specific kind of psychological injury, you can at least stop adding self-blame to your pile. If you've been feeling foggy, exhausted, or unable to concentrate at work, and you've been wondering what's wrong with you, the answer is probably nothing. You might be having a normal neurological response to an abnormal situation. Second, be honest with yourself about whether your workplace is going through something temporary or whether the uncertainty has become the permanent condition. The research on chronic ostracism shows us that people don't acclimate, they deplete. And the same principle applies to chronic uncertainty more broadly. If you've been telling yourself things will settle down after this quarter for 2 years running, you should examine that. The distinction between a rough patch and a new reality matters for the decisions you make about where to invest your energy and your career. Third, and this is the one that actually has strong research support, make sure work isn't carrying your entire psychological load. People whose sense of identity, meaning, and social connection is distributed across multiple areas of their lives handle workplace instability significantly better than people for whom work is everything. And that's not because the instability hurts them less, it's because the damage is contained to one domain instead of flooding all of them. If your job disappeared tomorrow, would you still know who you are? That's a real question, and for many people who've built their entire identity around their career, the answer is an uncomfortable no. And lastly, pay attention to the question of trust. Not whether you trust your employer in the abstract, but whether you trust them to tell you the truth when it matters. Because if the answer is no, you're carrying a cognitive load that most people underestimate. You're spending mental energy every day trying to read signals, interpret announcements, and figure out what's actually happening beneath the official narrative, and that's work. It's invisible, uncompensated, and draining you, and it's work. Recognizing that for what it is doesn't solve it, but it does help you make clearer decisions about how long you're willing to keep paying that cost. Thanks for listening to Cyberspace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. As always, until next time, stay curious and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a week.